Alright, so we're back to the Manifesto of the Communist Party. Right, it's probably gonna be a little bit shorter today, leaving a little bit earlier, but that's fine. Alright, so what did we read yesterday? Oh man, I'm tired. Right, it felt like it was kind of just more of the same. It's a lot of history from a certain viewpoint, a lens. Yeah. They're talking about how this new world order that they have seen, how it works pretty much from their perspective. Yeah, what happens. And I think some of it is spot on or relevant today. Other things feels like they might not even have been spot on back then. Alright. But they're talking about alright, but we were reading yesterday about how the bourgeoisie created an unsustainable system, right? They're kind of saying that the capitalists are necessarily creating consumerism, right? That kind of idea that just, yeah, they use the word exploit. I would say just consume, just that endless greed for more. It kind of seems that the Communist Manifesto says that that's the bourgeoisie way, and that is how capitalism will always work. They didn't use those words; those was my words, so I don't know if I. If we're specifically talking about the capitalists, no, I don't think we're talking about the capitalist in general. I think we're talking about a specific type of capitalist. The consumeristic one, the bourgeoisie. That's who we're talking about. The current capitalist, well, the capitalist 150 years ago, 200 years ago, somewhere like that. And a lot of communists would probably agree that it's the current as well. But a lot of the problems that they have written up, right? The ones that it seems convincing to me that these things are problematic, like the creation of big organizations without a lot of oversight, because big organizations lends to a lot of political, social power, whatever, that gets organized at the top, and that kind of structure is inherently corruptive, right? For the top position. Yeah, like Node Runner was saying before, right? It's what was that? Yeah, I think they're more corporate and yeah, and out of touch. I think that probably happens. It doesn't even have to be a corporate organization. I think, yeah, I think when you build a big organization, that makes especially people at the top, it makes them
It's the deep breath before the plunge.
right, it's corruptive. Yeah, it's just corruptive that it. And that makes sense, right? Because the people on the top, right, they start making stuff that they think are the best. And their biases will shine through the organization. And of course, they're not gonna understand necessarily, right, what's better for everybody else. And I'm not even sure that it can be 100% blamed for doing what's best, looking out for number one. Yeah. So I would say that the problems are an argument for oversight, for regulation, right? From the outside. Yeah, regulation and saying, oh, well, don't do this, don't do that. Maybe it's also an argument for a different... Right, as I said, right, I see a lot of these problems as like the bourgeoisie from the attitude of consumerism, right? That consume, consume, consume. We gotta see these numbers growing, and that's the bottom line, right? That's the main source of motivation. And I think this regulation, how it is implemented today, and how it has been more and more implemented over these 150 years or whatever, they've all been... Oh, well, not all of that, but a lot of it is we regulate to temper that motivation and that corruption, right? Yeah, to make other stuff. So I would probably make small, like, some sort of change to capitalism where to have a... Well, I'm not even sure it's part of capitalism, but I suppose it is. That's this text view anyway. Yeah, I would change the attitude to be... Yeah, like an appended definition of value. Right? That contains some kind of ethical standpoint. I don't even want to say what that ethicalness should be, right? I have my own political opinions on that, but I don't think political opinions should necessarily be reflected on any any improvement to the system should not contain political ideas. They should more contain the accessibility of political ethical ideas. That the structure, instead of just watching numbers grow, it should be like a motivation to be a moral agent in society, right? That the organization looks itself as being a moral agent in society. I don't know how that would be implemented. Well, again, I go back to, oh man, I feel like a broken record. Man, the sunshine of my ideas are really blinding me. Actually, I want to point that out. Just want to make a quick search here, like the UBI problems. I want to read an essay or like the Communist Party, the problem with universal basic income. Well, this seems like would solve all our problems. That sounds sarcastic, right? Yeah, I want to read something like that in the future. I'm way too blinded by that sunshine, because to me that seems like the way to implement an ethical thing would be to give that power to the actual worker, right? The actual worker can say, well, fuck this, a more empowered worker can say, fuck this, I quit. Today, a lot of workers can't really do that. They can't set their foot down and say, I won't be a party to this. And I mean, just that, that's not enough, but right, in the long term, right, giving that, again, right, that's actually, no, that's probably fine, right? I don't want to say what ethics they want to follow. I just want to give the worker the power to follow their own morality, whatever it may look like. Yeah, something like that. All right, let's continue reading. Oh wow, that was just, it wasn't even a summary. I was just... All right, the dangerous class, lumpen proletariat, the social scum, that passively rotting mass thrown off by the lowest layers of the old society, may, here and there, be swept into the movement by a proletarian revolution. Its condition of life, however, prepare it far more for the part of a bribed tool of reactionary intrigue. That's actually interesting. And a good point, right? Like, people who works all day, right, and just are exhausted, just like... Or like the homeless drug addict and whatnot, right? The people that society at the moment really just spits out. The beggars and these people, they have, right? I don't know about the beggars. Probably, right? But they are in a situation where they have no economical power and living paycheck to paycheck, right? It's a struggle for food. It's not a struggle against the class, it's a struggle for food. And if you're in that kind of situation, it is very easily to be bribed into, well, not even bribed into, it's... They don't, like... I can understand people not really having time for politics. I think it's an unfair assessment to say that they're bribed. I suppose that was a problem more earlier, like people buying votes. I remember hearing about that. People just getting paid. People just, that's how they... How in democratic elections, that's like how they went around, right? Here, take this money, vote for me. Here, take this money, vote for me. Here, take this money, vote for, well, vote for X, I suppose, rather than vote for me, but you get my point. And I guess that's still, I don't know how big a deal that is in Sweden, but I never hear about, what are those called? People that pay, the lobbyists, right? There are probably few of those, but yeah, lobbyism kind of sucks, right? Because that's that exact problem on a grander scale. Like the politicians end up in a similar situation to the... Right? They are all swept up in their political whatever. They get indoctrinated into their own world and how it works. I don't know. And they're too busy doing their political thing to... There's so much politics going on, right? There's so much politics. One would argue too much, right? Just don't have to meddle with everything, right? From the top-down system, right? You don't have to meddle with everything. Right. You could actually, and that's, yeah, we're talking about decentralization, right? Delegate, right? You don't have to make decisions from a centralized point of view always. Yeah, delegate. But since Power wants power. And it's corruptive, right? They don't want to delegate. They don't want to just, when they've gotten their hands on the power, they don't just want to leave it over, right? Just, oh no, yeah, here you go. Unfortunately, right? So a system in place for delegation and like a outspoken, written down rule that decentralize as much as you can, right? It's just like with the capitalist, right? Pure motivation just to get more and more power is not... I don't think it's preferable. Right, in the condition of the proletariat, those of old society at large are already virtually swamped. The proletarian is without property. His relation to his wife and children has no longer anything in common with the bourgeois family relations. Modern industry labor, modern subjugation to capital, the same in England as in France, in America as in Germany, has stripped him of every trace of national character. Law, morality, religion are to him so many bourgeois prejudices behind which lurk in ambush just as many bourgeois interests. Right, I find this, how it's written, a bit off-putting, but right, if we change it around, right, that it's where's that? Stripped him of every trace of national character. That I found off-putting, right? But what I can concede is, right, they don't have any free time to... Right, we can take that again, the Maslow thing again, right? Right, if we do this thing again, people down here don't have, like, there's not a lot of time for self-improvement and all that stuff. It's just about getting food. Right, and that's, I guess, you get stripped of character, right? When that's the only thing that exists. The struggle for food. No, I completely disagree, right? We're born and raised into certain personal traits, and those personal traits, from my point of view, is a person's character, right? And that's, you don't get stripped from that, right? It's, I don't know. But I can see the problem, right? Where it's like, well, again, right? Nobody has time for politics when you don't know if you're gonna get any food tomorrow. That's kind of the point, right? I think, yeah. All the preceding classes that got the upper hand sought to fortify their already acquired status by subjugating society at large to their conditions of appropriation. Yeah, right. With power comes corruption. And corruption is kind of a rude word, now that I think of it. It's like self-interests. Like people will do self-interest and, well, I don't know. Alright, the proletarians cannot become masters of the productive forces of society, except by abolishing their own previous mode of appropriation, and thereby also every other previous mode of appropriation. They have nothing of their own to secure and fortify. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities for and insurances of individual property. Right, here we go. This is where it really loses me, right? You always have stuff to lose, right? Right, assuming that you do get food tomorrow, right? And you can lose that food. As long as you exist, you can lose your life. Right? They have their wife and children. There's a lot of stuff to secure and fortify. And I would say that, and it's not even, right, even if that weren't necessarily the case, I would say that this mission is to destroy. No. Their mission is to improve their own situation, right? That from a political standpoint, right? It's not about tearing other people down. It's about lifting this group up. That animosity, right? From the get-go, I've not really embraced the animosity of the text, right? Destroy all previous securities. Individual property as well. I don't know. Right, all previous historical movements were movements of minorities or in the interest of minorities. That makes me happy, yeah, right? Empowered the individual, right? And the way to empower the individual is not necessarily by destroying all individual property. It's... I've talked about that before, right? I get empowered by having this. Right, the proletarian movement is the self-conscious, independent movement of the immense majority in the interest of the immense majority. The proletariat, the lowest stratum of our present society, cannot stir, cannot raise itself up without the whole superincumbent strata of official society being sprung into the air. And there is a point, right? There is a point, right? Again, we're the fluid border of the proletariat here. The proletariat are the people that don't own anything now. Suddenly, again, getting whiplashed. But yeah, right? The person working 2 jobs just to get food and shelter, that person don't have time for politics. So it needs more people that have the time for politics to care about them. And it's like, sure, I can get behind that. That makes sense. If you don't have time for politics, then... Also, I would say that... I wouldn't even say necessarily that, right? It might not even be just time. It might be just no interest in politics, right? There's a lot of people that have no interest in doing politics. And I would say that, yeah, it's probably a good idea for, well, I mean, I like an inclusive society, right? I mean, there are a lot of socio-economical groups, right? Groupings that one can create, like the proletariat, that I'm not a part of, and I still want to politically make improvements for these groups, right? Right? I want society to be good for all its people. Right? And this is not necessarily, right? It's, when I hear myself say it, it sounds very, what's that word? There is a word for it. Damn it. Where you think that you are better than everyone else and therefore you have to fight for them, right? That makes sense. Pity political acts. I don't know. I don't remember the specific word I'm looking for here. But I mean, I'm not super rich. I'm not for the top 1%, but I don't want to tear them down. Sure, I would probably make them pay more taxes, but I would want them to That's another class that I'm not a part of, and I would want that type of personality and that type of people that are in that situation today to be included in society as well. Right? All people I would want to see included, right? Just because I'm not part of a group doesn't mean I cannot advocate for said group. Right? I might not have an personal understanding of the personal struggles of people that would be grouped in a way where I don't fit that mold, right? I don't know what that feels like, but I can still listen to a report where someone says that this thing sucks, and the feelings I get from this sucks, and I can look at that and say, well, sure, right? I might not be able to empathize, right? I might not get the emotions, but I mean, I can agree to, well, that is your feelings. And I can have political opinions on how to deal with those, right? How you feel treated unfairly, right? I can do that, no problem. Like, that's an intellectual, political exercise, if that makes sense. Like, I've heard that before, right? I've heard that argument before, like some extreme feminists have said, just because you're a man, you cannot have political opinions that are for the... like, that would fall under the feminist... what's that called? The feminist umbrella. And I mean, I understand that, right? I don't like to identify as any ist, like communist, feminist, pragmatist, damn it. But like political ideology, I don't like the idea of marrying a political ideology. But I like discussing all questions on their own merit, right? And I can concede that I don't, right? I definitely concede that, like, my personal attachment to the question of abortion, for example. Well, that's a bad example because that's not really a big issue here. But if it were, right, I don't have a personal investment, the same personal investment as that of a woman. That makes sense to me, but that doesn't mean that I cannot make an intellectual... that I don't have an opinion and that I cannot argue the politics of it, right? My words are not worth less just because I'm not a woman. Except for if I try to explain the experiences of women, right? Experiences that I cannot... I don't know how, like, childbearing will work, or having an abortion, right? That's not part of something that I will ever experience. So as long as I don't speak to what someone else's feelings are, right? I can talk about what people reported, though, and I think that's fine. I wonder if this text is doing that. This struggle, right? This text is kind of claiming that the proletariats are struggling against the bourgeoisie, and I'm guessing a lot of these so-called proletarians would say, would end up in a situation where they're like, I'm just trying to get by, I'm just trying to get food, right? I'm not struggling against any person, right? What was that, right? They were talking about the bribery thing, right? The proletarian that fights with the company that they're working for, right? If they join in with the bourgeoisie politics, they wouldn't consider themselves bribed, and if they just follow what someone else is saying, because it makes sense to them what the bourgeoisie are saying from a political standpoint, that is not them being bribed, right? That is their political opinions, and I would not want to... If I come in there and say, well, your political opinions is this, and they say, well, no, it's not, then what gives me the authority, right? What gives me the authority to claim their opinion for them? Which is kind of that thing I find off-putting of this text. Right? But that doesn't mean that, right, just because I differ in opinion, like, I still have ideas that how I think that people in your situation, how your lives can be improved. And we can disagree on those questions, and we can discuss them, and that's great. Just don't do the, oh, I know better than you thing. Right. Politics are all just a bunch of opinions, right? It's just opinions. That's a lot of what we're talking about. And if you boil it down, it's just opinions about how you want society to look. And opinion, right, cannot be right or wrong because it's an opinion. It's a subjective viewpoint of the world. So yeah, it cannot be better or worse. I mean, from my point of view, right, all of my opinions are the best opinions. Because they're mine, right? I mean, if I didn't have the best opinions, then I wouldn't have those opinions. That makes sense to me, yeah. That all people would think in a similar way, right? Yeah, of course my opinions are the best opinions. From my point of view, but right, from an objective, right, when you and me are in a dialogue, right, my opinions, just because they're mine doesn't make them to you, right? They have no authority in this, right? So that's why I'm in a position that I argue my opinions, right? I argue and I try to convince you, and hopefully I'll listen to your opinions, and maybe I can learn something and improve my own opinions, because, well, I do want my best. I do want the best opinions, right? And if you can convince me, however that is done, right, I would consider that new opinion the better one. Though not in substance, yet in form, the struggle of the proletariat with the bourgeoisie is at first a national struggle. The proletariat of each country must, of course, first of all settle matters with its own bourgeoisie. In depicting the most general phases of the development of the proletariat, we traced the more or less veiled civil war raging within existing society up to the point where that war breaks out into open revolution, and where the violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie lays the foundation for the sway of the proletariat. Veiled civil war. That's actually an interesting view. I don't know about this. I would say, like, in this metaphor, right, the civil war, right, they're not... There is a war ideas, kinda, right? And I actually think that this veiled civil war, if, like, as it exists in society. Another word for it is politics, right? The discussion of politics and whatnot. I don't see that as a bad thing, right? Because, right, no opinions have any inherent rightness or wrongness. They are just opinions, and you have to argue them, right? And we have a structure, well, we're trying to have a structure, that's the whole point of democracy, right? Where these ideas duke it out, right? You argue one idea, you argue another idea, and you go back and forth with different political opinions about different societal problems or structures or whatever, right? How society works. We discuss those back and forth, and we try out new stuff and change society a bit this way and that way, right? This war, right? This discourse is another word for it, right? This discussion, these ideas, these conflicting ideas might, apparently conflicting ideas even, right? Duke it out and then we try it out, right? As the scientific species we are. We change some stuff around and then we re-evaluate, right? There is an evolution of ideas, not necessarily a revolution, violent overthrowings, right? If one idea, right, takes too much power and the other ideas gets to put on the, what's that called, wayside? They get put to the side, and enough people, like, our ideas are not heard, then, yeah, when the words no longer works, that is when the fists come up, right? That's just how it works. At a small scale and a big scale. For sure, it becomes violent, but I don't think that is necessarily needed, right? If society can keep the balance between like these discussions and these ideas, conflicting ideas, and we can keep a civil tongue, civil discourse instead of civil war, these competing ideas and opinions can compete without war having to break out. Right, I've heard an interesting viewpoint today that someone had the idea that World War III is already up and running, but it's not an idea of violence. It's not a war of violence. It's a war of ideas, right? It's of information, that the warring stuff is happening online, on the internet rather, like a lot of... what's that? Like hacking and trolling and infecting and manipulation and all that stuff. And I find that idea...
You know why they put oxygen masks on planes? So you can breathe. Oxygen gets you high.
Part of me hopes that is the case and that we won't actually reach the point where the fists are needed, right? Where we can just keep using words. I think that's preferable, yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that's preferable, right? Instead of using our fists, using our words. And, I mean, trickery and rhetorics and... yeah, you can do a lot of shitty stuff with words, but, right. I would say bringing out a bomb and blowing people up is just worse. It's just worse. Hitherto, every form of society has been based, as we have already seen, on the antagonism of oppression and oppressed classes. Right, every empire was built on with the blood, sweat, and tears of slaves. Is that what they're saying? Different forms of slavery, right? Got slaves and soldiers and whatnot, right? Yeah, the power, right? The power of an organization comes from the number of people that works for said organization and its goals, right? That is how the power gets centralized. No? Right? Caesar can't just stand up and say, all right, now everybody, like, I'm just gonna conquer all this stuff, right? You need other people, right? So, sure, I can go with this, even though I think it's... Right, saying that they are necessarily oppressed is it's a little bit, right? Sure, a lot of oppression happened, but it's... I don't think it necessarily antagonized, right? I can say that people... Sure, a lot of people were oppressed, but I don't necessarily see that oppression as antagonistic, right? I think there were a lot of slave owners, like in just human history and current slave owners that wanted the best for their slaves. They're not antagonistic. I mean, they are oppressing, but they're not necessarily antagonistic, if that makes sense. Maybe. It's my idea, anyway. Right, but in order to oppress a class, certain conditions must be assured to it under which it can at least continue its slavish existence. Slavish existence. Exactly. Alright, the serf, in the period of serfdom, raised himself to membership in the commerce, just as the petty bourgeois, under the yoke of feudal absolutism, managed to develop into a bourgeois. Yeah. The modern laborer, on the contrary, instead of rising with the process of industry, sinks deeper and deeper below the conditions of existence of his own class. And I think this... In a short-sighted way, this is probably true, right? It goes like this, but the general trend, right? This text was probably written in a downslope for what they call the proletariat, right? But in general, the proletariat gets... Right, they get access to more and more stuff, which is kind of... I'm assuming that, yeah, right, we've been talking about the majority of people were serfs and proletariat, right? The middle class is growing. That means that the proletariat is shrinking. Like, that's a general trend, even though the divide is switching, right? I talked about that before. He becomes a pauper, and pauperism develops more rapidly than population and wealth. And here it becomes evident that the bourgeoisie is unfit any longer to be the ruling class in society and to impose its condition of existence upon society as an overriding law. It's a very black and white view on this, on the system, right? That it's right. They screwed this thing up. Therefore, they're unfit, right? This whole system is unfit, right? It's all bad and we have to tear it down. I don't know about that. It is unfit to rule because it is incompetent to assure the existence to its slave within his slavery, because it cannot help letting him sink into such a state that it has to feed him instead of being fed by him. Society can no longer live under this bourgeoisie. In other words, its existence is no longer compatible with society. Wait. It depends a little bit how you look at it, right? Right. Society looks very different today than it did back then. So one could argue then, yeah, it was no longer compatible and it changed. While I think a lot of modern communists would argue that we're still in the yoke of the bourgeoisie and the capitalists, right? So I would say that sure, it was no longer compatible and therefore it changed. That would be my opinion, my view on this thing, right? Yeah, I like iterative changes and improvements to society rather than trying to tear it down and replace it, because tearing it down and replacing it is just a dumb idea. Right? A different structure would come with its own unique problems. Right? And if you're just trying to tear stuff down, right, you're not trying to solve the individual problems, right? Organizing society, right? It's kind of implying that it's easy, right? Oh, they are unfit because they're incompetent. Well, from where does your competency come? From theory? No empiricism, just theory? Just hypotheses? I don't think so. Society is a very complex structure with very many moving parts, and these moving parts, right, it's difficult to make it work. Right, and that I would say, right, the uncompatibility changed, right? A lot of stuff changed. It looks different today than what it did then. And I would say, like, some of the problems they had that led to the Communist Manifesto, right? Some of the problems they were having are... Some of them are addressed, and some of them are still we're still, as a society, trying to fix. And work on, and try to improve. Right, the essential conditions for the existence... Right, we don't have, like, a lot of starvation today. Not that I'm aware of, right? Alright. Starvation statistics. I mean, I don't know how trustworthy this is. World hunger. Oh. World hunger. Key facts. Alright, more than enough food is produced? Sure. After steadily declining for a decade, world hunger is on the rise. Look at that. So it goes like that. Alright, so 8.9% of people globally from 2018 to 2019. Number of unnourished grew. Alright, there's a lot of nourished. So what if we compare this to 100 years ago? I don't... I mean, that it's just an assumption on my part, but if you go back 100 years, maybe there were more hunger. Maybe not. Actually, that's just an assumption on my part. I don't know, and I don't have the... I think this number was way too big for my preference. Or was it like 10%? 8.9? Sure, right, it's way higher than I thought. It wasn't starvation, because starvation, like, if a lot of people starve, then they die, and then the number goes down. So hunger makes a lot more sense, right? And just undernourished. Yeah, that's a way better statistic. So maybe it has been growing with globalization. It's just moved. It's moved around, it's shuffled, right? If you could go back a couple of hundreds of years before we got this global trade economy and whatnot, right? Then the people at the bottom, the people who went hungry, were more localized and maybe a lower number, right? Because maybe before industry, right, if everybody knew everybody, right, they wouldn't just let their friends starve. But now with a globalized society, we have like shunted it away, right? There's no one. Well, maybe there are people that are living in hunger in Sweden, but most people don't, right? So we've shunted the statistics, right? I don't see any of this possible hunger going on because it's not in my... It doesn't happen in my neighborhood. It doesn't happen in my village. It happens on other places in... in the world, but I see those things, right? Those are... I remember as a kid, right? When, like in school, when you didn't finish your food or just didn't eat properly or whatever, they say, well, think of the starving children in Africa, they said. I've heard that plenty of times, right? So it is visible, right? It's not... It's far removed, though. It's more of an abstract idea rather than I'm seeing an actual starving person. Right? Since it's not part of my direct environment, right? If I see someone, like, living in hunger, I'll like beggars, for example. I've given beggars food, I've given them money. And they aren't even living in hunger, right? Just because of, well, to be fair, I've given given to charity a lot, and I've given way more to charity, so that doesn't really work out, I don't think. Yeah, that's an argument. I think a lot of people do give to charity, right? To try and deal with this. That actually makes me think of Hans Rosling again. He said something like that. I don't remember where it was, but he said like, right, if you're having a farm that can feed 5 people, right, and then you come with an technological innovation that just improves the quality of the farm to make it be able to feed 10 people. The general tendency is not to store the food and just making sure that it is balanced and we don't get hunger, right? Instead, what we do is that we increase the number of people to 10 and we still keep the same problems. Yeah, so I guess that's what this text is saying, right? This structure that they are living in, they were saying it's unfit because the structure causes, well, not causes, but it perpetuates some problems and they do not improve the quality of life for the bottom rung of society. And they want to see a change in this direction. Yeah. Right, and again, right, it's not about existence compatibility, it's about opinions, right? Right. Just like, yeah. you can have slave society where 90% of people are slaves, but they can be well fed, right? That is a possibility. And that would be, if it works good enough, it could be considered compatible with society, right? Because it was society for a while, but then it changed. For the better, in my opinion, of course. Well, not of course, right? Should not assume that. Like, a lot of people have the opposite opinion, right? That it changed for the worst. For the worse. A lot of people think that. Right. The essential conditions for the existence and for the sway of the bourgeois class is the formation and augmentation of capital. The condition for capital is wage labor. Wage labor rests exclusively on competition between laborers. Maybe it did, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Yeah, it's not necessarily this way. Right. The advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation of the laborers due to competition by the revolutionary combination due to association. Right. The development of modern industry therefore cuts from under its feet from the very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates products. What the bourgeoisie therefore produces above all are its own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. And it only looks like that if you imagine it as a struggle and a fight between two classes, right? If you see the bourgeoisie as working like with the rest of humanity for the improvement of humanity, right? There is no fall, there is no victory, it's just change, right? Like the text itself said that this bourgeoisie system, it's kind of making itself, that it's create problems for itself that it cannot solve. But the assumption that these problems, right, that the bourgeoisie don't want to solve these problems are a mistake. Yeah, I think that's a mistake and a misguided view of people in general, yeah. I mean, I can understand why this view happens because of the corruptive nature of happening with the music. Oh, it's fine, we're back. Alright, the corruptive nature of these power structures, right? That, yeah, it looks like there is a antagonistic view. But they're like the bourgeoisie, the capitalists, the CEO or whatever. Sure, they're corrupt and looking out for number one, but that doesn't necessarily mean they want terrible stuff for the worker. It is kind of... There are quite a lot of modern examples of this, though. But it kind of looks that way, right? It's kind of the black and white looking, right? Just because you're looking out for number one and make improvements for yourself to the detriment of others does not mean that the goal was the detriment of others, right? The goal was only the improvements for the self, right? The CEO with the billions of, like, all the money as bonuses while they fire all the workforce, right? they're just doing the best they can in their situation, right? They don't see themselves as villains in these stories. Right? They don't. Some definitely do, right? I don't want to. Yeah, and I think a lot of, right, there is probably like a skewed statistic that more of the bourgeoisie is, like, we're talking about the CEOs and whatnot, right? That's not news, right? That the narcissist or the psychopath is one of the best, well, that is a beneficial personal trait for that job, right? Because it's a corrupting position in society, right? People who don't try to resist this corruption will do the best job when it is only about increasing the size of the number, right? So there's probably a skewed thing, and there is probably a societal incentive towards narcissism that is a consequence of the societal structure. Yeah. So I guess there is a point to this that I would have to agree with, right? That. But it's still like the narcissist is not necessarily antagonistic to be, still not antagonistic to be antagonistic. It's self-interest, right? I guess there is a tendency that if you look for people wanting to harm other people, you find more of that going on within the group of narcissists than the rest of the population. Yeah. Right, we're talking about statistics here, right? There's just more of them in that situation. That doesn't make all of them like this. I don't think that even makes a majority of narcissists like that. Yeah. Right. Oh, damn it. This was yesterday, this reference. I was looking for it. Right. In their works of the 1840s and 50s, prior to Marx having worked out the theory of surplus value, Marx and Engels used the term value of labor, price of labor, sale of labor, which, as Engels noticed in 1891 in the introduction to Marx's pamphlet, Wage, Labor and Capital, from the point of view of the later works, were inadequate and even wrong. After he had proved that the worker sells to the capitalist not his labor, but his labor power, Marx used more precise terms. In later works, Marx and Engels used the terms value of labor power, the price of labor power, the sale of labor power. Right, so they're not selling labor, they're selling labor power. Actually, I don't necessarily get that distinction because I'm not really an economist, and they don't really describe the difference here, do they? They just state that this is the fact without arguing the fact or explaining the fact. So I don't know, I don't understand the difference, and I don't know. Right, 11. The 10 hours bill passed, alright, in 1847 after a long struggle by the workers' movement in Britain. Some Tories representing the landed aristocracy supported the bill to take revenge on the industrial bourgeoisie for supporting the Corn Laws in 1846, which had been reduced tariffed on imported grain and thus the cost of industrial labor at the expense of profits in agriculture. I'll take their word for it. Oh, that was the... This was the final point? Alright, it's fall. Yeah, the bourgeoisie fall and the proletariat victory is equally inevitable. Right. As long as civilization don't collapses and it continues in the current path, I would have to, right? Even though I don't agree with how the language is put forth with the hostile language, I would say that, yeah, if we continue to advance modern industry to the next level, right? We talk a lot about automation nowadays, right? And we do that, right? We automate more and more and more and more and more. That is what our species is doing, right? And it has been doing it for a while, right? That's modern industry. The Industrial Revolution and the automation revolution we're doing now, I suppose. We will end up in a situation where there's a lot of people and not a lot of actual work to be done, right? Where there is no less and less need for the proletariat. It is shrinking already, right? That's another argument for UBI, right? To adapt to this future. I don't know if it's inevitable, but that is what the trend looks like, right? There's a lot of useless jobs today as a consequence of, right? There's so many jobs today that doesn't really benefit society. From my opinion, anyway. Like, I would say, yeah, there's a lot of jobs today. People just roll their thumbs, roll stones up the hills just to roll them down. Big rocks. I think that is definitely going on. And I suppose society could start, like from a dystopian point of view, society could create more and more and more of these so-called pointless jobs, right? And that would, right, one could imagine that that would not be an inevitable change, right? I've seen that Black Mirror episode where there's a great Black Mirror episode where they're cycling the bikes. I think it's like the second episode, or it's the first season anyway. Where they live in their little boxes filled with just surrounded by commercials, ads all over the place, and then they go out and they sit on their bikes and they just cycle their bikes. Right? And it's kind of, my understanding of that episode was that they were generating power, but that's a super inefficient way to generate power, right? It's just a pointless job just to have a job, just to keep the economic system rolling. Right? And yeah, it's a failure of imagination, right? Dystopian stuff can happen. I don't believe in that being, I think like a universal basic income is a more likely future, but that's just speculation, right? Just like this is just speculation, and it's a speculation from a worldview that I don't share, right? With this, I mean, sure, there are antagonistic forces, but it's not antagonistic like by its essence. The bourgeoisie, by its essence, is not necessarily antagonistic, I don't believe. Just like the proletariat is not by its essence necessarily antagonistic. Alright, that was part 1. That took, what, like 3 days? Alright, so it's gonna take a while, but that's fine. Alright, so part 2 is the proletarians and the communists. What was part 1 called? Manifesto. It was called the bourgeoisie and the proletarians. Alright, so then it's the proletarians and the communists. Oh, what number was I at? Is that it? 45. Alright, so that is the continuation. Alright, so we talked about the bourgeoisie. Now we're talking about the proletarians and their... Right, proletarians are the social class. The communists are the political actors, I guess. Alright, but that is an early lunch because yeah. It's earlier than I planned, but I planned on an early lunch, so... Yeah, earlier than planned, but still it's what I planned, so alright. Thanks for hanging out, and have a good one, and see you next time. Cheers.